Most people believe they lack discipline. They believe some people are naturally strong, while others simply aren't. But if you look closely, the real difference is much simpler. Most people quit the moment life becomes uncomfortable. Not extreme discomfort, just small things. The alarm rings early in the morning, and they press snooze. A workout becomes difficult, and they stop halfway through. A project begins to feel frustrating, and suddenly it can wait until tomorrow. The mind always finds a reason. I'm tired. This is too difficult. I'll do it later. At first, these decisions seem harmless, but over time they train the mind in a dangerous way. Every time you escape discomfort, the brain learns something. It learns that quitting is an option. And the more often that option is chosen, the easier it becomes to choose again. Soon the mind begins avoiding discomfort automatically. Difficult tasks feel overwhelming, challenges feel exhausting, and discipline begins to feel impossible. But centuries ago, warriors and mountain monks in Japan trained their minds in a completely different way. Instead of avoiding hardship, they walked directly into it. They climbed mountains for hours without rest. They stood beneath freezing waterfalls for meditation. They walked alone through forests in silence for days. This ancient discipline was called Shugendo, the path of endurance. To an outside observer, the training looked brutal. Why would anyone willingly choose such discomfort? But the practitioners understood something most people today forget. Discomfort is not the enemy. Discomfort is the training ground. When you repeatedly face hardship without escaping it, something powerful happens inside the mind. Fear of difficulty begins to disappear. The moment that once made you quit becomes just another step forward. Today we're going to explore this ancient method of building mental toughness. And to understand how it works, we need to look at the story of a man who struggled with something that millions of people experience every day. He was not lazy. He was not weak. But he had one habit that quietly controlled his life. Whenever things became uncomfortable, he quit. Until one encounter with a Shugendo practitioner forced him to confront a truth he had never realized before. The real reason he kept quitting. And the moment he began training his mind differently, everything changed. Ethan was not lazy. At least that's what he told himself. He had ideas. Big ones. Plans about improving his life, building better habits, becoming stronger and more disciplined. The problem was never starting. Ethan started things all the time. He started going to the gym every January. He started learning new skills online. He started ambitious projects at work. For the first few days, sometimes even a few weeks, everything went well. He woke up early. He trained hard. He worked with focus. During those early days, Ethan felt proud of himself. It felt like his life was finally changing. But then something predictable happened. The excitement faded. The alarm rang early one morning, and his body felt tired. A workout became more painful than expected. A project at work became frustrating and slow. And suddenly, the same quiet voice appeared in his mind. You can skip today. You deserve a break. You'll continue tomorrow. So Ethan stopped, just for a day. But that one day quietly turned into several. The new habit disappeared. The project lost momentum. And eventually everything returned to the way it had always been. At work, Ethan's manager once described him in a way that stayed in his mind. He has a lot of potential. Most people would see that as a compliment. But Ethan knew what it really meant. Potential meant unfinished effort. Potential meant starting without finishing. Potential meant quitting when things became difficult. One weekend, feeling frustrated with himself again, Ethan decided to take a short break from the city. A co-worker had recommended a small retreat in the mountains, a quiet place where visitors could spend a few days disconnecting from everyday distractions. Ethan didn't expect anything life-changing. He simply wanted silence. The mountain air was cold and clear when he arrived. Tall forests surrounded the small temple where the retreat was held. The place felt peaceful, but also strangely demanding. People there woke before sunrise. They walked long mountain trails. They spoke very little. During his first evening at the temple, Ethan noticed a man standing quietly near the edge of the forest. The man was older, calm, and dressed in simple training robes. Later, Ethan learned his name was Master Daiki, a practitioner of Shugendo, an ancient path of endurance practiced by mountain monks. Over the next day, Ethan struggled with the simple routines of the retreat. The early wake-up time felt exhausting. The long mountain walks made his legs ache. More than once he thought about leaving early. One afternoon, while Ethan sat resting on a stone near the trail, Daichi approached him. "You are thinking about quitting?" Daichi said calmly. Ethan looked surprised. "How did you know?" Daichi smiled slightly. "Because your mind is not tired," he said. "Only your habit of avoiding discomfort is tired." Ethan stared at the ground quietly. For the first time, the thought appeared clearly in his mind. Maybe the problem was not that life was difficult. Maybe the problem was that he had spent years training himself to escape difficulty. And now, every time discomfort appeared, his mind automatically chose to quit. After that conversation, Ethan could not stop thinking about what Master Daichi had said. "Your mind is not tired. Only your habit of avoiding discomfort is tired." The sentence bothered him, mostly because it felt true. For years, Ethan had believed that discipline was something you either had or you didn't. Some people were naturally strong, he thought, while others simply struggled to stay consistent. But Daichi's words suggested something different. Maybe the problem wasn't weakness. Maybe it was training. The next morning, Ethan woke before sunrise with the rest of the people staying at the temple. The air in the mountains was cold, and the silence of the forest felt almost overwhelming. After a long walk along a narrow trail, Daichi stopped near a waterfall hidden deep in the trees. The water crashed down from the rocks above, sending cold mist into the air. "This," Daichi said, "is part of the training." Ethan looked confused. Training for what? Daichi turned toward him. For endurance, he explained that the mountain monks who practiced Shugendo believed that strength of mind could not be developed in comfort. Comfort keeps the mind weak. It teaches the brain to escape the moment something becomes difficult. Shugendo was designed to train the opposite. Monks walked through mountains for hours without rest. They meditated beneath freezing waterfalls. They fasted, endured storms, and spent long periods in silence. To an outsider, the training looked extreme, but Daichi explained that the purpose was not suffering. The purpose was resilience. When you face discomfort willingly, he said, something important happens inside the mind. The fear of difficulty begins to disappear. Ethan watched the waterfall crashing down in front of them. Most people spend their lives trying to make everything comfortable. Daichi continued. They avoid pain. They avoid exhaustion. They avoid anything that feels difficult, but the mind becomes fragile when it only knows comfort. He paused, letting the sound of the rushing water fill the silence. Warriors understood this long ago. They trained their minds in hardship so that when real difficulty appeared, it no longer controlled them. Ethan slowly began to understand what Daichi meant. All his life he had been trying to remove discomfort from his routine. If something felt too difficult, he stopped. If something became frustrating, he delayed it. But each time he escaped discomfort, he had unknowingly trained his mind to expect the escape. Daichi looked at him again. Discipline is not built by waiting for motivation, he said calmly. It is built by walking through discomfort without turning back. Ethan looked once more at the freezing waterfall and the steep mountain path stretching ahead of them. For the first time, he realized something uncomfortable. The reason he had always quit was not because life was too hard. It was because he had never trained his mind to endure hardship in the first place. The first morning of training began before sunrise. Ethan had barely slept. The mountain air was colder than he expected, and the silence of the forest felt unfamiliar compared to the noise of the city. When he stepped outside the temple, the sky was still dark. A small group of practitioners had already gathered near the trail. Master Daichi stood at the front, calm and still, as if the cold meant nothing to him. Today, Daichi said quietly, You will begin learning endurance. No one asked questions. They simply began walking. The path climbed steeply through the forest. Rocks covered the ground, and the morning air burned in Ethan's lungs as he struggled to keep pace. After only 20 minutes, his legs already felt heavy. By the time an hour had passed, his mind began whispering the familiar thoughts. This is too much. You're not used to this. You should stop and rest. Ethan slowed his steps slightly. Daichi noticed immediately. Without turning around, he spoke. The mountain is not tiring you, he said. Your mind is. The group continued climbing. Every step made Ethan more aware of how often his mind complained. His body was tired, but the voice in his head was louder. Why am I doing this? This isn't necessary. I could leave and return home. But something about Daichi's words stayed with him. Your mind is tired of discomfort. So Ethan kept walking. The trail continued upward for nearly 3 hours. When they finally reached the top of the mountain ridge, the view stretched across endless forests and distant peaks. The group stopped. No one spoke. Daichi simply closed his eyes and stood silently. Ethan collapsed onto a nearby rock, breathing heavily. Why do we climb like this? He asked after catching his breath. Daichi opened his eyes slowly. To teach the mind something important? What? That discomfort does not control you unless you obey it. Ethan thought about the climb. For most of the journey, his body had not been the real obstacle. His mind had been. The constant urge to stop. The endless negotiation. Just rest for a moment. You can finish tomorrow. Daichi continued speaking. The mind creates suffering long before the body reaches its limit. If you listen to every complaint your mind produces, you will stop long before your true capacity appears. Over the next few days, the training became more demanding. Each morning began with another long mountain walk. Some days they carried heavy packs. Other days they moved through steep trails in complete silence. The goal was always the same. Continue moving even when the mind demanded comfort. But the most difficult exercise came 3 days later. Daichi led Ethan to the waterfall he had shown him earlier. The water crashed down with powerful force, sending cold mist across the surrounding rocks. This is part of Shugendo training, Daichi said. Ethan stared at the freezing water. You want me to stand under that? Daichi nodded. For how long? Until the mind stops fighting. Ethan stepped closer to the waterfall. The water looked painfully cold. His body tensed before he even touched it. The moment he stepped beneath the falling water, the shock hit him instantly. His breath disappeared. Every instinct in his body screamed to step out. The cold was overwhelming. Within seconds, his mind began shouting. Get out. This is too cold. You don't need to do this. His muscles tightened as he struggled to breathe normally. Stay, Daichi said calmly from the side. Ethan clenched his teeth. The cold water pounded against his shoulders and head, making it difficult to think clearly. Every second felt longer than the last. His mind kept repeating the same command. Leave. 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 But something strange happened after a short time. The panic began to fade. The cold was still there, but the urgent need to escape became quieter. His breathing slowly stabilized. The discomfort had not disappeared, but his reaction to it had changed. When Ethan finally stepped out of the waterfall, he was shaking slightly. Daichi handed him a towel. What did you learn? He asked. Ethan thought for a moment. The cold didn't change, he said. No. But my reaction to it did. Daichi nodded. That is endurance. The training is not about removing discomfort. It is about removing your fear of it. Over the following weeks, Ethan continued practicing the Shugendo disciplines. Long climbs, cold exposure, silent endurance. At first, each exercise felt brutal, but gradually something inside his mind began shifting. The discomfort that once felt unbearable became familiar. The voice that constantly told him to quit grew weaker, not because it disappeared, but because he stopped obeying it. One afternoon during another long mountain walk, Ethan noticed something unexpected. The trail was steep. His legs were tired, but his mind was quiet. No internal complaints, no constant urge to stop, just steady movement, step after step. For the first time, the climb felt peaceful. When they reached the ridge again, Daichi looked at him carefully. "You are changing," he said. Ethan nodded slowly. "I think I understand now." "Understand what?" "That quitting was never about my body being weak." Daichi waited. "It was because my mind had never learned to endure discomfort." Daichi smiled faintly. "That lesson," he said, "is the beginning of real strength." Ethan looked across the mountains, stretching far into the distance. The training had not made life easier. The climbs were still hard. The cold was still uncomfortable. But something important had changed. Discomfort no longer controlled his decisions. And for the first time in his life, he realized he was capable of continuing long after his mind had once told him to quit. But here is something most people misunderstand about mental toughness. They believe strong people simply have more motivation, more willpower, more natural discipline. But that is not how resilience is built. Motivation disappears the moment discomfort arrives. The alarm rings early, motivation fades. The work becomes frustrating, motivation disappears. The task becomes exhausting, and suddenly quitting feels reasonable. This is why most people remain stuck. Their discipline depends on how they feel. But the Shugen practitioners understood something far deeper. Mental toughness is not built in moments of inspiration. It is built in moments of discomfort. Every time you continue when the mind tells you to stop, something changes. The mind becomes stronger. The fear of difficulty becomes weaker. And slowly, step by step, endurance becomes natural. Because resilience is not something you wait for. It is something you train. After several weeks in the mountains, Ethan began to understand something important. The training he was experiencing was not random hardship. Every exercise had a purpose. Every climb, every cold waterfall, every moment of silence was designed to train the mind in a specific way. One evening, after returning from a long mountain walk, Ethan asked Master Daichi a question that had been on his mind for days. "How do these exercises actually build mental toughness?" he asked. Daichi sat quietly for a moment before answering. "Endurance is not created through intensity," he said. "It is created through a system." He then explained that Shugen practitioners trained 3 disciplines that slowly strengthened the mind's ability to endure difficulty. The first discipline was voluntary hardship. Most people encounter discomfort only when life forces it upon them. When that happens, the mind reacts with resistance. But Shugen reverses this pattern. Instead of waiting for hardship to appear, practitioners deliberately choose difficult experiences. Long mountain climbs, cold water meditation, physical exhaustion. By walking willingly into discomfort, the mind begins to change its relationship with difficulty. Instead of fearing hardship, it learns to expect it. And when hardship becomes familiar, it stops feeling overwhelming. The second discipline was non-negotiation. Daichi explained that most quitting happens during a small internal conversation. The mind begins negotiating with itself. Maybe I should stop. Maybe this is enough for today. Maybe I'll continue later. The moment that negotiation begins, quitting becomes easier. So Shugen practitioners remove negotiation entirely. When a climb begins, the climb will be finished. When training begins, the training will continue. There is no debate. The decision to endure has already been made. This simple rule prevents the mind from escaping difficulty through endless excuses. The third discipline was calm observation. Most people fight discomfort emotionally. When something becomes difficult, they react with frustration or panic. But Shugen teaches the opposite approach. Instead of fighting the discomfort, simply observe it. Notice the tired muscles. Notice the cold water. Notice the burning lungs during a long climb. But do not react. Over time, this calm awareness teaches the mind something powerful. Discomfort is temporary. It rises. It peaks. And eventually it fades. When the mind stops treating discomfort as an emergency, endurance becomes far easier. Ethan began applying these principles not only in the mountains, but in everyday life. When work became difficult, he continued instead of escaping. When fatigue appeared, he observed it rather than immediately stopping. When frustration appeared, he noticed it without allowing it to control his actions. Gradually, the habit of quitting began losing its strength. Because every time Ethan continued despite discomfort, he weakened the old pattern that had once controlled him. One evening after training, Daichi summarized the lesson simply. Mental toughness is not something you are born with, he said. It is something you train every time you refuse to escape difficulty. Ethan looked out across the dark mountain horizon and understood. Strength had never been hidden from him. It had only been waiting on the other side of discomfort. The transformation in Ethan did not arrive suddenly. There was no dramatic moment where he woke up feeling unstoppable. No day where the mountains suddenly became easy or the cold water stopped feeling cold. The hardship remained exactly the same. But Ethan's reaction to it slowly began to change. During the first weeks of training, every difficult moment had triggered the same response inside his mind. Stop. This is too hard. You've done enough. Now something different was happening. The voice still appeared. But it no longer controlled his actions. During the morning climbs, Ethan noticed that his body could continue far longer than his mind had once believed. The same trails that had exhausted him during the first days were now simply part of the routine. His legs still burned. His lungs still struggled for air during the steep sections. But the discomfort no longer felt like a signal to quit. It felt like part of the path. The waterfall training changed as well. The first time Ethan had stepped beneath the freezing water, panic had taken over almost instantly. His body had tensed. His breathing had collapsed. Every instinct had demanded escape. But weeks later, when he stood beneath the waterfall again, something surprising happened. The cold still struck his skin with the same intensity. But the panic was gone. His breathing remained steady. His mind remained calm. The discomfort was still present, but it no longer felt overwhelming. Ethan realized something important in that moment. The cold had not changed. The mountains had not changed. The training had not become easier. The only thing that had changed was his relationship with discomfort. Back in the city, this shift followed him into his daily life. At work, difficult tasks no longer triggered the same frustration they once had. When a project became complicated, he continued working instead of escaping into distractions. When problems appeared, he stayed with the challenge instead of delaying it. For the first time, Ethan began finishing things he had started. Projects moved forward. Responsibilities no longer felt overwhelming. Even his co-workers began noticing the difference. "You seem more focused lately," one colleague told him. Ethan smiled slightly. He knew the real change was deeper than focus. It was endurance. Later that week, while walking alone along the mountain trail one final time, Ethan stopped at the ridge where he had first struggled to climb. The view stretched across endless forests and distant peaks. The same place that once felt impossible now felt familiar. Master Daichi stood beside him quietly. "You see the difference now," he said. Ethan nodded. "Yes. What changed?" Daichi asked. Ethan thought for a moment before answering. "The difficulty didn't change," he said. "My mind did." Daichi smiled. "That is the purpose of Shugendo." Ethan looked across the mountains once more. For years he had believed that strength meant removing difficulty from his life. But now he understood the opposite. Strength comes from walking through difficulty without turning back, and the moment the mind stops running from discomfort, it becomes capable of far more than it ever imagined. For most of his life, Ethan believed that strength meant avoiding difficulty. If something felt too exhausting, it meant he needed more rest. If something became frustrating, it meant he should step away. If something felt uncomfortable, it meant it wasn't the right time. This way of thinking feels natural in the modern world. Comfort is everywhere. Technology makes life easier. Convenience removes effort. And slowly, without noticing, the mind begins to expect that life should always feel manageable. But the human mind was never designed to grow inside comfort. It grows in resistance. It grows when effort is required. It grows when the path becomes difficult and the choice appears: continue or quit. The practitioners of Shugendo understood this long before modern psychology began studying resilience. They walked through mountains not because the journey was easy, but because the difficulty strengthened the mind. They stood beneath freezing waterfalls not to prove toughness, but to train calm endurance in moments of discomfort. Through these experiences, they learned something simple but powerful. Discomfort is not the enemy. It is the teacher. Every moment you choose to continue when your mind wants to stop, something inside you changes. The boundary of what you believe is possible begins to move. Tasks that once felt overwhelming become manageable. Challenges that once triggered fear become ordinary. Ethan eventually understood this lesson clearly. The mountain had never been the obstacle. The cold water had never been the obstacle. The real obstacle had always been the voice in his mind telling him to escape the moment discomfort appeared. And the moment he stopped obeying that voice, he discovered that his strength had been there all along. Waiting quietly on the other side of endurance. Endure the cold. Endure the moment when your mind tells you to quit. Discomfort is not your enemy. It is your training. Every step taken when you want to stop, every effort continued when you feel tired, every moment you refuse to escape difficulty builds a stronger mind. This is the path of Shugendo. Strength through endurance. Discipline through hardship. Resilience through repetition. Before you go, subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments. What challenge in your life are you avoiding that could make you stronger?